Grids are especially helpful with multi-designer projects such as magazines and websites, where the format remains consistent over multiple issues or time spans. Grids composed of multiple columns work in print-based projects that include books, magazines, and newspapers, as well as websites, tablets, and mobile devices. Columns are text containers. They do the heavy lifting of conveying the content of all your projects. Even a two-column page such as this can be made more lively by breaking through the grid with a call-out or a bit of an illustration. Or it can provide some entry points with inset drop caps, color, or subheads. This text-dominant three-column grid has outlines around each ragged right text column, which helps give the column a crisp edge. And there are even several entry points provided, including color panels, headlines and subheads, and inset drop caps. It looks very structured, which is appropriate for the serious subject matter. Here's a slightly less structured spread with a three-column grid on the left-hand page. It has a smaller column to the left, which is used for the bold call-out text. That helps give it some airiness to the page. Facing it is another text-heavy page set in two justified columns, with a column of space to the left. This time, the space is used for the diagonal stroke of the giant slab serif initial A, which reads into the bold headline. I want to point out that there is no imagery on this page. The design only uses type, yet it's dynamic and inviting. The dramatic typographic scale and the typographic variety are a wonderful example of how type can serve as both the content and the image. Here's another page full of text which is handsomely designed and, more importantly, which operates as efficiently as a Venus flytrap to entice the reader in. Grids start out with the full page width of a single column for the headline and the deck, a two-column wide intro paragraph, and the continuation of the text into three columns. Notice how the point size of the text starts large and gets smaller as the reader moves throughout the text. Check out the bold caps lead-in sentence in the intro paragraph, which also helps to pull the reader in. This six-column sidebar sits on a three-column story continuation. Different widths of column grids on a page can help vary the reader's experience by enlivening the content. In another example of a three-column format used across the spread, the first column on the second page continues the three-column grid, and the fourth and fifth columns are split into a narrow column of marginalia related to the main story plus a sidebar. Notice another grid at the top of the sidebar. It has 5 images with captions, so a grid can be a container for continuous text as well as a container for other grid structures nested within the primary grid. Try some of these column grid structures for yourself. Once you get going using columns, you'll see your grids can be divided in many different ways. Grids don't need to be limiting. In fact, they can open the doors for your creativity. Creating column grids in different software can be kind of tricky. So let me show you how I would approach it if you need to create a design that uses a column grid structure in InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. Let's start off with InDesign, since this is the simplest. The column grid structure starts with creating a new document. Whenever you set up your document, depending on whatever size that you choose, you can also initially type in the number of columns and the amount of gutter space between each of those columns. Remember, your gutter should be roughly the same distance as your baseline grid or your leading, but this can always be adjusted. Once you say Create, notice that this will give you a new document that has your columns already placed inside of the margins of your page. At any time, if you ever need to adjust this column structure, simply go up to Layout, down to Columns and Margins, And then from here you can adjust and change up the number of margins that you need as well. Another way you can adjust margins, if we say OK to this, is by clicking on the individual ones and dragging them to an individual location. We can go up to View, down to Guides, and choose to unlock your column guides. When you do this with your selection tool, you can now click on any column guide and place it exactly where you want it to be. This is great for creating an offset column structure that gives you some more dynamic placement of all of your text. But it's not always useful, especially if you've got some structured text like in body copy. A final way you can create a column structure is by simply creating guidelines. I like to do this by creating a set of guides for my text and a set of guides for my images. To create guideline columns, go up to Layout, down to Create Guides. Within this will allow you to create rows and columns of blue-lined column grids. Making sure that Preview is turned on, you can either set these to fit between the margins or the page. If we choose margins, everything will be placed inside of our pink margins, and you can see as I increase the number of columns, this will start to create some blue lines. The advantage of this is that you can give it a different gutter width. So if I want everything to just have blue solid lines, I can set it to be here, and then I can also set them to be nice and proportionally distant inside of my original column structure. So that's InDesign. Let's jump into Photoshop and look how we can set up some columns in here. Now, Photoshop doesn't initially recognize margins and column structure, but that doesn't mean we can't create our own grid. To create grids of columns in Photoshop, go up to View and down to New Guide Layout. Inside this New Guide Layout, of course, you can create margins, but if you only want to create column structures, here's where you can turn on columns, type in or increase the number of columns you want, and you can even increase or decrease the amount of gutter space that you want within inside of each column grid as well. Once you're done, you can say OK, and now you've got your column grid structure already set up and ready to go. In InDesign, it's also tricky. InDesign doesn't have a regular column grid structure already built into it, but you can create your own. To do this in InDesign, locate your rectangular tool and click and drag and create a rectangle roughly the size that you want it to be. Now, if you want all of these rectangles to go across your page and be proportional, what I would do is make a copy by holding down the Option key and drag off one of them and giving yourself an implied gutter space between it. Then you can go up to Object, down to Transform, and choose Transform again, or also the keyboard shortcut of Command D. Do this as many times as you need until it fills up your page. Then you can select all of the rectangles and drag them out until the margins are nice and complete on your page. Now I've got a good 5 columns going across my page. Let's turn them into guides. Go up to View, down to Guides, and choose Make Guides. Notice Command 5 is the keyboard shortcut. This will turn all of your rectangles into guides that you can now use. In order to not move your guides, go up to View, down to Guides, and make sure you lock your guides down. This will keep everything nice and in place, and you can start to align things to this column structure.